Sometimes the people who change your life don't arrive with an introduction. Sometimes they arrive with a knock on the door during a storm. The knock came at exactly 8:17 p.m. Ethan Brooks remembered the time because he had just glanced at the old clock hanging above the refrigerator when the sound echoed through the tiny farmhouse. Outside, rain hammered the windows in steady sheets, and the wind rattled the porch swing his late wife had once loved. Inside, the house was warm. The smell of baked chicken, mashed potatoes, and fresh rolls lingered in the air. It wasn't a fancy dinner. It never was. But to Ethan and his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, it was enough. "Dad, these potatoes are way better than school lunch," Lily declared proudly, lifting her fork like a judge announcing a winner. Ethan chuckled. "That's because I made them with actual potatoes." Lily laughed so hard she nearly dropped her glass of milk. For a moment, the worries of unpaid bills, rising grocery prices, and another long week at the lumber yard seemed far away. Moments like this mattered. They were small, quiet victories. The kind no one applauded. The kind that built a life. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof. Ethan reached for another roll when the knock came again. 3 sharp taps. Then silence. Lily looked toward the front door. "Were you expecting somebody?" Ethan shook his head. "Not unless Amazon started delivering during thunderstorms." He stood from the table and crossed the room. The old floorboards creaked beneath his boots. Through the frosted glass beside the door, he could make out only a vague silhouette standing beneath the porch light. Whoever it was had been caught in the storm. He unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The cold wind rushed inside immediately. Standing on the porch was a woman he had never seen before. She appeared to be in her mid-30s. Rainwater dripped from her dark coat. Strands of blonde hair clung to her face. In one hand, she held a weathered wooden box against her chest, as though it contained something precious. In the other, nothing. No suitcase. No purse. No phone. Just the box. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The porch light cast a soft glow across her tired features. She looked exhausted. Not physically exhausted alone. Something deeper. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying too much for too long. Finally, she managed a small, uncertain smile. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said quietly. "My car broke down about 2 miles back. I tried calling for help, but there's no signal out here." Ethan glanced toward the road, disappearing into darkness. "That's true." She hesitated. "I know this sounds strange, but is there any chance I could come inside for a few minutes until the storm lets up?" Ethan studied her carefully. Years of being a father had taught him caution, but it had also taught him something else. Sometimes people simply needed kindness. Behind him, Lily appeared in the hallway. The little girl peeked around his side and looked up at the stranger. The woman offered a faint smile. Lily smiled back instantly. And in that quiet second, while rain fell across the porch and thunder rolled somewhere beyond the fields, none of them knew that this unexpected meeting would become the beginning of a story neither time nor money could ever erase. Ethan stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in before you freeze out there." The woman nodded gratefully and stepped inside. The warmth of the house seemed to hit her all at once. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes as if she had not felt truly safe in a very long time. Water dripped from the hem of her coat onto the old hardwood floor. "Sorry," she said softly. "I am making a mess." "The floor has survived Lily learning how to roller skate indoors," Ethan replied. "A little rain is not going to hurt it." Lily giggled immediately. "That happened 1 time. 3 times, Ethan corrected. The stranger laughed quietly. It was the first genuine expression Ethan had seen from her. He noticed how tired she looked when she smiled. Some people looked older because of age. She looked older because of worry. Ethan took her coat and hung it near the door. "I am Ethan." He pointed toward his daughter. "And this troublemaker is Lily." Lily placed both hands on her hips. "I am not a troublemaker." "That is exactly what a troublemaker would say." The woman smiled again. "I am Claire," she said after a small pause. "Claire Bennett." Ethan noticed the hesitation but did not comment on it. "Nice to meet you, Claire." A loud clap of thunder rolled across the fields outside. The windows rattled softly. Claire instinctively tightened her grip on the wooden box she carried. Ethan glanced at it briefly. The box was old, scratched around the corners, and carefully polished despite its age. Whatever was inside clearly mattered. Still, he asked nothing. "Have you eaten?" Ethan said. Claire looked surprised. "What? Dinner?" He nodded toward the kitchen table. Have you eaten? She looked down for a second. Not today. Lily immediately jumped from her chair. You can have my roll. Lily. Ethan smiled. We have more rolls. Claire stared at the little girl as though the offer had caught her completely off guard. That is very sweet. Dad says food tastes better when people eat together. Claire looked toward Ethan. Your dad sounds smart. He also burns pancakes. Ethan sighed dramatically. Some family secrets should stay secret. A few minutes later, Claire sat at the table with a steaming plate in front of her. The rain continued tapping against the windows. The kitchen glowed beneath the soft yellow light hanging above the table. For the first time since arriving, Claire seemed uncertain. Not nervous. Uncertain. As though she had forgotten how to sit at a family dinner. Ethan noticed she kept the wooden box beside her chair instead of setting it down somewhere else. You really do not have to worry, Ethan said gently. Nobody is going to take it. Claire looked at the box and then back at him. I know. But something in her voice suggested she was not entirely convinced. They ate quietly for a while. Lily filled every silence with stories from school, a science project involving baking soda, and a stray orange cat she desperately wanted to adopt. Claire listened carefully to every word. Not politely, not out of obligation. She listened like someone hearing ordinary happiness for the first time in years. Then Lily suddenly tilted her head. Claire, yes. Why do you look sad? The room became still. Even the sound of the rain seemed distant for a moment. Claire lowered her eyes toward her plate. Ethan expected her to avoid the question. Instead, she gave a small smile filled with more honesty than words. Because sometimes life gets heavy. Lily thought about that for a second. Then she reached into her backpack beside the table, grabbed a crayon, and scribbled something onto a scrap of paper. She folded it once and handed it across the table. Claire opened it slowly. Four simple words were written in uneven handwriting. Nobody should eat alone. Claire stared at the note. Her eyes filled with emotion she could not quite hide. And for the first time that night, she stopped looking like a stranger passing through a storm and started looking like someone who had finally found shelter. Claire remained seated at the kitchen table long after dinner ended. The small note Lily had written rested beside her plate, folded neatly and protected as carefully as the wooden box she carried everywhere. Outside, the storm continued moving across the countryside, but inside the farmhouse another kind of quiet had settled over the evening. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that only exists when people stop pretending and simply allow themselves to breathe. Ethan gathered the dishes and carried them to the sink. You do not have to help, he said as Claire stood from her chair. I know. She picked up a dish towel. I want to. Lily pointed dramatically. Dad always says nobody gets free room service. Ethan laughed. I said that exactly once. Still counts, Lily replied. Soon the three of them stood together in the small kitchen. Ethan washed dishes. Claire dried them. Lily provided constant commentary about everything from school lunches to the mysterious habits of squirrels. The simple routine felt strangely natural. Claire found herself smiling more than she had in months. Every now and then she glanced toward the family photographs displayed above the counter. Most showed Ethan and Lily at different stages of life. Fishing by a lake. Building a snowman. Sitting in front of a Christmas tree decorated with handmade ornaments. There was joy in every picture, but there was also an empty space she could feel even without asking. Eventually her eyes settled on a framed photograph of a woman with warm blue eyes standing beside Ethan. Claire looked away respectfully. Ethan noticed. That was my wife, Sarah. Claire turned back toward the photograph. She looks kind. She was. His voice remained calm, but there was a softness behind it. Lily was 3 when we lost her. The kitchen grew quiet. Lily lowered her head for a moment before continuing to dry silverware. The sadness was familiar to them now, woven into their lives like an old thread in a blanket. Present, but no longer defining everything. I am sorry, Claire said gently. Ethan nodded. Thank you. Neither of them said more. Some experiences did not require explanation. Later that evening, Ethan prepared the guest room. It was small, with an old wooden dresser, a reading lamp, and a quilt that had belonged to his grandmother. Nothing expensive, nothing impressive. Yet when Claire stepped inside, she paused. This is beautiful. Ethan looked around the room, confused. Really? She smiled faintly. You would be surprised how many places look expensive but never feel like home. For a second, Ethan thought she might explain what she meant. Instead, she simply placed the wooden box on the bedside table. As he turned to leave, Claire spoke again. "Why did you let me stay?" Ethan looked back. "Because it was raining." Most people would have asked more questions. "Maybe." He shrugged. "But sometimes people need help before they need questions." Claire stared at him. She seemed almost unsettled by the answer. "Good night, Claire." "Good night, Ethan." After he left, she sat on the edge of the bed and carefully opened the wooden box. Inside were old photographs, letters, and faded keepsakes. Memories. Pieces of a life she had spent years building and months trying to escape. Her fingers brushed across a photograph before she closed the lid again. Down the hallway, she could hear faint laughter. Lily was apparently negotiating for an extra 30 minutes before bedtime. Ethan was losing the argument. Claire smiled despite herself. Then she looked at the little note one more time. Nobody should eat alone. For simple words. For words nobody in her world had ever thought to say. And as the rain tapped softly against the farmhouse roof, Claire realized something she had not expected. For the first time in a very long time, she was not dreading tomorrow. Morning arrived wrapped in silver mist. The storm had passed during the night, leaving the fields glistening beneath the early sunlight. Ethan was already awake before 6. Years of balancing work and parenthood had trained his body to rise before the alarm. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the farmhouse as he stood at the stove making pancakes. Not perfect pancakes. Slightly uneven pancakes. The kind that looked homemade because they were. A few minutes later, Lily shuffled into the kitchen wearing oversized pajamas and carrying a stuffed rabbit by one ear. "Do not tell me," Ethan said. "You were about to ask for chocolate chips." "I was going to ask politely." Denied politely. Lily groaned dramatically and collapsed into a chair. The sound of footsteps appeared from the hallway. Claire entered quietly, almost hesitant, as though she still was not certain she belonged there. The morning sunlight caught her hair, and for the first time Ethan noticed she looked different without the exhaustion that had shadowed her face the night before. Not carefree, but lighter. "Good morning," Ethan said. "Good morning." She looked toward the stove. "That smells amazing." Lily immediately pointed her fork. "Wait until you taste them before making promises." Claire laughed softly. The sound surprised even her. Breakfast unfolded with the same comfortable rhythm as dinner. Lily talked enough for 3 people. Ethan listened while preparing lunches. Claire mostly observed. Yet the more she watched, the more puzzled she became. There was something unusual about Ethan Brooks. Not because of what he said, because of what he never asked. He had not asked where she came from. He had not asked why she was traveling alone. He had not asked about the wooden box or the expensive watch she had forgotten to remove. Most people asked questions within minutes. Some asked before introducing themselves. Ethan had offered food, shelter, and kindness without requesting a single explanation. After breakfast, Ethan grabbed his work jacket. "I need to head to the lumber yard." Claire nodded. "I should probably find a tow truck." "The road is still flooded in places," Ethan said. "Might be easier later today." Lily brightened immediately. "She can stay." Ethan looked toward Claire. "You are welcome to stay until your car situation gets sorted out." Claire stared at him. "You really do not mind?" "Not at all." He shrugged. Besides, Lily would probably organize a protest. A large protest, Lily confirmed seriously. Ethan laughed and headed toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. "There is food in the refrigerator. Help yourself to anything." "Thank you." "No problem." Then he was gone. Claire stood by the window and watched his truck disappear down the gravel road. She remained there for several moments. In her world, generosity usually arrived with conditions attached. Contracts, expectations, favors, publicity. Nothing was free. Nothing was simple. Yet Ethan seemed completely unaware of those rules. Or perhaps he had simply chosen not to live by them. "He is always like that," Lily said from behind her. Claire turned. "Like what?" "Nice." Lily shrugged. "Dad thinks everybody deserves a second chance." Claire looked back toward the empty road. Those words settled somewhere deep inside her. Because if there was one thing she needed more than rest, more than privacy, more than escape, it was exactly that. A second chance. And what she still did not realize was that the quiet man she had met during a storm was about to become the first person brave enough to offer it. The day passed more quickly than Claire expected. By afternoon, the clouds had completely cleared, revealing endless stretches of blue sky above the rolling fields. Lily convinced her to help paint a birdhouse in the backyard, a project that somehow involved more paint on their hands than on the wood itself. For a few hours, Claire forgot to check the time. She forgot to worry about emails, meetings, headlines, and expectations. She forgot the world she had spent years building. And for the first time in months, forgetting felt wonderful. Ethan returned home shortly after 5 o'clock. His truck rolled into the driveway, covered with a thin layer of dust from the back roads. As he stepped out, he froze at the sight of Lily chasing Claire around the yard with a paintbrush. "Dad, help me," Claire called playfully. "She is dangerous." "You started it," Lily shouted. Ethan laughed and shook his head. "I leave for one day, and complete chaos takes over." The three of them spent the evening finishing dinner together. The farmhouse filled once again with warmth, laughter, and the smell of homemade food. Yet beneath the comfort of the evening, Claire felt a growing tension inside herself. Every passing hour made it harder to leave. Not because she could not leave, because she did not want to. After dinner, Lily disappeared upstairs to finish homework. Ethan sat in the living room repairing a loose cabinet hinge, while Claire remained at the kitchen table, staring at the wooden box beside her. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of old floorboards and the distant hum of crickets outside. Finally, she spoke. "I should probably tell you something." Ethan looked up from his tools. "Only if you want to." Claire smiled sadly. Even now, he refused to pressure her. She took a slow breath. "The truth is, I was not just driving through town." Ethan waited. "A few months ago, I sold a company." "Congratulations." Claire almost laughed. It was the most understated response she had ever received. "It sold for several $billion." Ethan blinked once. Then he nodded. "That sounds like a lot of paperwork." Claire stared at him. "That is your response. Should it be something else?" For a moment, she could not answer. Then she looked down at her hands. "The company was my entire life. I spent 20 years building it." Her voice softened. Then everything fell apart. Ethan set down the hinge and listened. "My engagement ended. Several people I trusted turned out to care more about money than loyalty. Every conversation became about business. Every relationship felt conditional." She swallowed hard. "I started feeling like I could not tell who genuinely cared about me anymore." The room remained still. Ethan did not interrupt. He did not offer advice. He simply listened. Claire continued. 3 nights ago, I packed a few things, left my phone behind, and drove without a destination. Then the storm came. Ethan looked toward the window where the last sunlight painted the fields gold. "Sometimes people need time to breathe." "That is exactly what I thought." Claire smiled faintly. "The funny part is that I drove hundreds of miles trying to escape everybody. Then I ended up in a farmhouse with a man and a little girl who would not stop talking to me." "Mostly the little girl," Ethan corrected. Claire laughed. The tension eased slightly. But neither of them noticed the black SUV slowly turning onto the distant county road, or the second vehicle following behind it, or the fact that somewhere far away, people had finally discovered exactly where Claire Bennett had disappeared. And by morning, the quiet refuge she had found would no longer be a secret. The next morning began with the sound of engines. Not one engine. Several. Ethan was halfway through pouring coffee when an unfamiliar rumble echoed across the valley. Lily looked up from her cereal. "Dad, do we have neighbors getting married?" Ethan walked toward the front window. What he saw made him stop. 3 black SUVs were slowly moving down the gravel road toward the farmhouse. Behind them came another vehicle, followed by a white truck carrying equipment cases. The procession looked completely out of place against the quiet farmland. Claire had gone pale before the vehicles even reached the driveway. She did not need an explanation. She already knew. "Claire," Ethan asked. She closed her eyes briefly. "They found me." The convoy rolled to a stop outside. Doors opened almost immediately. Several professionally dressed men and women stepped out, followed by security personnel carrying tablets and phones. One woman in a Navy business suit hurried toward the house. The moment she entered through the front door, her eyes filled with relief. "Claire." The woman practically exhaled the word. "Thank goodness." Claire stood slowly. "Megan." The woman rushed forward and wrapped her in a brief embrace. "Do you have any idea how worried everyone has been?" Claire smiled apologetically. "Probably more worried than necessary. You disappeared for 4 days." Megan looked ready to continue, but finally noticed Ethan and Lily standing nearby. "Oh." She straightened her jacket. I am sorry. My name is Megan Hart. I am Claire's chief operating officer. Lily blinked. Chief of what? Ethan covered a laugh with a cough. Megan smiled despite herself. Something like that. More people entered carrying phones, folders, and expressions that suggested they had not slept much all week. The peaceful farmhouse suddenly felt like the center of a corporate headquarters. Claire looked uncomfortable. Ethan noticed it immediately. The same woman who had laughed while painting a birdhouse yesterday now seemed trapped inside expectations again. One man stepped forward. Miss Bennett, there are reporters gathering in 3 states. The board wants a statement. Investors are asking questions. We need to discuss several urgent matters. Claire nodded politely, but her shoulders seemed heavier with every sentence. Lily leaned closer to Ethan and whispered, "She looks sad again." Ethan quietly nodded. The morning unfolded in a blur of meetings and phone calls. Claire spent hours speaking with advisors from the dining room, while laptops covered the table where they had shared dinner only days earlier. Every conversation seemed to involve numbers, schedules, and obligations. By noon, several local residents had begun driving past the farmhouse simply to see what was happening. Rumors spread quickly in a small town. By afternoon, people were already talking. The billionaire, the missing executive, the famous businesswoman. Yet the strangest part was not the attention. It was Claire herself. Despite all the activity surrounding her, she kept glancing toward the backyard where Lily was helping Ethan repair the old birdhouse. Finally, during a break in meetings, Claire stepped outside. Ethan looked up from his tools. "Busy day?" he asked. She laughed softly. "You have no idea." He handed her a paintbrush. "Then maybe you need 5 minutes without anybody asking you for something." Claire looked at the brush, then at him. Around them stood millions of dollars worth of executives, advisors, and resources. Yet somehow the most valuable thing offered to her all day was a simple moment of peace. And as she sat beside Ethan and Lily beneath the afternoon sun, dozens of people watched in confusion because none of them could understand why the most powerful woman they knew seemed happiest sitting beside a half-finished birdhouse in a quiet backyard. By the following week, the story had spread far beyond the county line. What began as a few curious neighbors driving past the farmhouse had grown into something much larger. Local newspapers picked it up first, then regional news stations, then national blogs. Everyone seemed fascinated by the same question. Why had one of the most successful business leaders in America vanished for days only to be found living in a small farmhouse with a widowed carpenter and his daughter? Ethan tried to ignore the attention. He still woke before sunrise. He still packed Lily's lunch. He still drove to the lumber yard every morning. But the world around him had changed. People who had barely spoken to him for years suddenly wanted conversations. Others had opinions. Plenty of opinions. One afternoon, Ethan stopped by Miller's General Store to pick up supplies. The moment he walked inside, conversations quieted. Not completely, just enough for him to notice. He grabbed a bag of dog food and headed toward the counter. 2 men stood near the coffee station. Their voices carried farther than they realized. "Funny how some people get lucky." "Luck?" the other man replied. "More like good timing." They both laughed. Ethan knew exactly what they meant. He paid for his supplies and left without responding. Dignity did not require an argument. Unfortunately, not everyone remained silent. A few days later, a businessman named Randall Pierce arrived in town. Randall owned several commercial properties across the region and enjoyed making sure everyone knew it. He was polished, wealthy, and never shy about sharing his opinions. During a community fundraiser at the town hall, Randall approached Ethan while several residents stood nearby. "You are Ethan Brooks, right?" Ethan nodded. "That is me." Randall smiled, but there was little warmth in it. "Quite the success story." Ethan remained calm. "I am not sure what you mean." "Come on." Randall chuckled. "A billionaire spends a few days at your house, and suddenly every camera in the country wants an interview. That is impressive." Several people nearby shifted uncomfortably. Ethan simply sipped his coffee. "Claire is a friend." Randall laughed louder. "Of course she is." The room grew quieter. Ethan could feel eyes turning toward them. "You know," Randall continued, "most people spend decades trying to get noticed by someone with that kind of money. You managed it in less than a week." Ethan set down his cup. His voice remained steady. "The day Claire arrived, I did not know who she was." "Sure." Randall smirked. "And now?" Ethan met his gaze. "Now I know she is someone who needed kindness." The answer was so simple that it caught Randall off guard. Yet the damage had already been done. By evening, rumors traveled faster than facts. Worse, Lily overheard some of them. The next day, she climbed into Ethan's truck after school, unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked. She stared out the window. "Some kids said you only help Claire because she is rich." Ethan's heart sank. Lily continued softly. "They said rich people do not visit people like us unless they want something." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan parked beside a field glowing beneath the late afternoon sun. "Lily." She looked at him. "When somebody is cold, we help them." "Yes." "When somebody is lonely, we help them." "Yes." "And when somebody is hurting, we help them too." Lily nodded slowly. Ethan smiled gently. "Then nothing changes just because they happen to have more money than we do." Lily thought about that for a long moment. Then she smiled faintly. What neither of them knew was that across the country, Claire was preparing for the biggest public appearance of her career. And before it was over, she was about to answer every rumor with a single sentence that would leave an entire room speechless. The ballroom in Chicago held nearly 1,000 people. Investors, executives, reporters, analysts, and television crews filled every seat. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the enormous room while cameras waited from every angle. On the giant screens behind the stage appeared the name that had dominated headlines for weeks. Claire Bennett. Back in the small town, Ethan had no interest in watching. He spent Saturday repairing a loose fence behind the farmhouse while Lily worked on a school art project at the kitchen table. The world seemed far away, but the world was not finished with them yet. Nearly every major news network carried the event live. Claire stood backstage adjusting the sleeve of her navy blazer. Megan approached holding a tablet. "You still have time to remove that section from the speech." Claire looked up. "Which section?" Megan smiled knowingly. "The honest section." Claire glanced toward the stage entrance. "No, that stays." A few moments later, the announcer introduced her. Applause filled the ballroom as Claire walked onto the stage. She smiled politely and thanked the audience before beginning her remarks. For nearly 30 minutes, she discussed business, leadership, economic growth, and future projects. The audience listened carefully. Everything proceeded exactly as expected. Then the question and answer session began. A reporter from a national network stood first. "Miss Bennett, many people have followed your recent disappearance and return. There has been significant public interest regarding your time in rural Missouri." A few people shifted in their seats. Cameras immediately focused more closely. Claire remained calm. "I am aware." The reporter continued. "There have been countless rumors about the man and his daughter who sheltered you. Some believe the relationship has been exaggerated by the media. Others claim he benefited from the publicity. What would you like people to understand about that situation?" The room grew noticeably quieter. Claire looked across the audience. Thousands of eyes waited for her answer. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she stepped away from the podium. One step, then another. Her heels echoed softly across the stage. The giant screens followed her movement. She stopped near the front edge and folded her hands. "For most of my adult life," she began quietly, "people knew my title before they knew my name." The room remained still. "They knew my net worth before they knew my character." Another pause. "And eventually I stopped knowing the difference myself." No one interrupted. No one moved. Claire continued. "Several weeks ago, I arrived at a farmhouse during a storm. I was exhausted, lost, and carrying more burdens than I could explain." Her voice softened. "The man who opened the door did not ask what company I owned. He did not ask how much money I had. He did not ask what I could do for him." The silence deepened. Somewhere in the audience, a reporter slowly lowered his pen. Claire smiled gently. "He asked one question." She paused. "Have you eaten?" The room seemed frozen now. Even the cameras felt motionless. Claire's eyes glistened slightly as she remembered the note still tucked inside her wooden box. "The first man who fed me before asking my name reminded me what kindness actually looks like." Not a single sound followed. No whispers. No laughter. No phones ringing. Just silence. The kind of silence that arrives when truth finally speaks louder than speculation. And hundreds of miles away, in a small farmhouse where dignity had always mattered more than attention, Ethan Brooks had no idea that an entire ballroom had just fallen silent because of him. The weeks that followed changed many things, but not in the way people expected. Reporters eventually moved on to newer stories. Headlines faded. Television crews disappeared. The attention that had once surrounded the farmhouse slowly drifted elsewhere. Yet some changes remained. One crisp autumn afternoon, a familiar black SUV turned onto the gravel road and stopped beside the mailbox. Lily spotted it first. She is here. She raced out the front door before Ethan could even stand from his chair. Claire stepped out smiling just in time to catch the excited hug that nearly knocked her backward. I missed you too, she laughed. Ethan walked onto the porch. You know, most visitors use the front walkway. Lily ignored him completely. Claire looked different. Not richer. Not more important. Simply happier. The strain that had once lived behind her eyes seemed lighter now. Over the next few months, her visits became regular. Sometimes she arrived for a weekend. Sometimes only for dinner. Sometimes just to sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the fields gold. She never tried to change the farmhouse. She never offered to replace it with something bigger. In fact, when she once suggested helping with repairs, Ethan handed her a paintbrush and put her to work. That hardly seems fair, she protested. Neither is making one person do all the work, Ethan replied. Lily declared this excellent parenting and immediately assigned Claire additional duties. Winter arrived quietly. One evening snow drifted across the fields while warm light glowed from the farmhouse windows. Inside, 3 place settings rested on the table instead of 2. The change was small, yet somehow it meant everything. During dinner, Lily set down her fork and looked around the room thoughtfully. Can I ask a question? Ethan nodded. Depends how expensive it is. Lily rolled her eyes. Not that kind of question. She turned toward Claire. When you first came here, were you scared? Claire thought for a moment. Yes. Of the storm? Claire smiled softly. Not the storm. The room grew quiet. I was scared nobody would see me as a person anymore. Ethan looked down at his plate. Lily reached across the table and squeezed Claire's hand. We saw you. Claire's eyes glistened. I know. A few months later, the town gathered for its annual spring festival. Families filled the park. Children ran between booths. Music drifted through the afternoon air. As the sun began to set, Ethan stood beside Claire watching Lily participate in a school performance. You know, Claire said quietly, people still ask why I disappeared that week. Ethan smiled. What do you tell them? Claire watched Lily laughing with friends beneath the fading sunlight. The truth. And what is that? She looked at him. I was searching for success my entire life. Her smile deepened. Then I accidentally found home. Neither said anything after that. They simply stood together as evening settled across the town. Nearby, Lily waved enthusiastically for them to come join her. And as they walked toward her side by side, there was no grand announcement, no dramatic revelation, no fortune changing hands. Just 3 people moving toward the same place. Sometimes the greatest miracles arrive quietly. Sometimes dignity is rewarded without fanfare. And sometimes a simple dinner shared during a storm becomes the beginning of a family that no one saw coming. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.